So this video is a continuation from the previous video. And as we talked about, in general, most photographers feel that sunrise and sunset are the best times of the day. There are companies that, stock photography companies, won't even look at your photos unless they are shot in that golden hour in the morning and at night. And this is because the light is just more interesting. The colors are the most saturated. The sky generally has the best texture. And the shadows are long and soft, and in general, it's the best time of day to shoot. You can do backlit shots. Now, one of the things that happens when you start shooting backlit shots, you're going to have to compensate or edit because your camera is not always going to read the scene correctly. For most of you who are shooting, what I'm just going to say is go ahead and let your camera determine the exposure for now, and to experiment with backlighting to see what it does, because that will help you in learning and understanding backlighting. And then when we get into photography 2, you'll learn how to make settings to get the shot you want. And also HDR, chapter 11 in your textbook, can help you fix some of these scenes that end up backlit that don't work very well. Photoshop's also available, and Lightroom. There's another backlit shot, what that looks like. And backlighting, as we talked about, is the light that comes from behind the scene. Backlighting filtered through the trees. That's a really cool shot. Backlighting on the flower. You can use the moon. The moon is a great way to light a scene. Obviously, this is a montage. Someone photographed the moon. And I'm going to tell you this. If you want the moon in your scene, shoot the scene. Don't worry about the moon. And then shoot the moon. The moon moves because we move and it moves. It's orbiting us and we're rotating. So when you go to shoot a scene, the exposure that is right for that scene will overexpose the moon every time. If you expose for the moon, the scene will be underexposed every time. And that's because the moon is really bright. And most people don't realize how bright the moon is. So what you do is exactly what they did here. Shoot your scene, then go back and shoot the moon. The exposure will be different. So you want to point at the moon to get the exposure read on the moon and shoot the moon, and then compile them in a photo montage in Photoshop. That's the only way anybody ever does it. I can promise you that none of the shots you see with the moon, with few exceptions, there are a few exceptions. I don't want to say none because, then something comes out and I'm like, okay, I'm wrong. But most scenes, the moon and the scene are not shot together because the moon is overexposed and moving and it's blurry. And I know you guys have seen a gazillion of those shots where where you try to take a picture of a scene in the moon and the moon is blown out. But then if you try to shoot for the moon, you can't see the scene. The only time you could probably capture the moon accurately in a scene is if the scene itself has artificial illumination that makes it bright enough that you can capture that. Yeah, see, that's normally what happens. This is all properly exposed. The moon's overexposed. That's what happens. And it's fine. It's not a problem here. But if you want the moon, you got to go in and take it separate picture and copy and paste it on there. I love this. I think this is incredible. This is impressionistic landscape photography. This is a series of photos that the photographer put together in this scene from time-lapsed. So what he did was he set up the camera and at sunset, and the clouds were moving through, and he did long exposures. And we're not doing that yet, but I want you to see what's possible. We will be doing things more like this in photography 2. But he set up a series of long exposures, and then he compiled them together in photo editing software and used blending modes and created this beautiful impressionistic looks like it's painted photograph. This is somebody moving the camera through rotating the lens while they're shooting to get this very abstract image. And that's another one that's just slightly out of focus. It looks like a painting. And the wind was blowing. You could see the wind whipping around in the pink grass down here. But it's just slightly out of focus, and it just creates that impressionistic feel to the photo. And there's another one done by the artist who did the time lapse, which is really, really weird because I have shown you guys, I was here, and I have shown you guys a photo I took after sunset of the dock. That's crazy. I just realized that's the exact same place I was. And this is in Minnesota. I'm trying to remember. Okay, I drove from here to Minnesota. It was the last state I had to see before I hit all 50. And it's somewhere between here and Minnesota, if not Minnesota. I just don't remember. Okay, my image is gone again. Scenes lighter than middle gray, such as beach scenes or bright sand or snow, reflect more than 18% of the light falling on them. So what will happen often is your camera will read the scene, the auto exposure will read the scene, and because it's so bright, it produces an image that's too dark. So you either have to make changes to your settings or use a filter or use photo editing software. And when we get into photography too, I'll show you how to do all this. Here is, everything is kind of grayish. And so one of the things that happens is this had to be overexposed a little bit to get the right lighting. But look at that beautiful, beautiful scene. It's probably Norway. There you go. Gorgeous. Quite often when you take shots like this, you have to make adjustments to your exposure because the camera is going to read the light wrong. And then in dark scenes, you usually want to underexpose so that you get good details in your shadows. And again, we will work with this when we get into photography too. For now, I just want you guys to think about the composition because it's my personal opinion that composition, once you get the composition right, it doesn't matter what device you have. You'll figure out how to take a good picture. Then once you know what shots you want to take, then you learn how to work the cameras, different types of cameras, to get those better shots. That's just beautiful. Guy walking through the woods and the sun is shining just right there. It creates that beautiful bright spot. Lavender fields in France at night. And I'm going to do a whole thing on astrophotography and photography too. Aurora Borealis. It's beautiful. So yes, one of the things we were talking about, when you have when you start thinking about your composition, you want that foreground, middle ground, background, and sky. And this is really interesting. The aerial photography of a road. It's gorgeous. But you always want to look for layers. You want something foreground, middle ground, background. And of course, then your sky. So in this case, foreground, middle ground, background, no sky. In the details in the foreground almost always. And in this case, my subject and my middle ground are similar. It's just beautiful. I love the colors at that time. That's after sunset, by the way. So you can shoot through what's called twilight. There are different phases of of twilight, I forget, we've already talked about this. So you can shoot through those different phases, and this is after the sun has gone down. And you need a tripod and you need a DSLR to get this kind of a shot, because you have to expose that sensor for longer than a cell phone can do. Here are some 11 surefire photography tips that you guys can access this in Blackboard. And then if you want, here's a lab to challenge yourself. Take a panoramic photo composed of 3 to 5 different segments that represent changes in either weather, season, light, or any other attribute in a single landscape. So actually this is referring to a student who had taken a really good landscape shot from week 8, and I turned it into that. And I used that background sky from the first photo you saw. And I put the moon in there. I added the moon, but then I modified to give different times of day to the shot. Okay, so landscape photography, it's a fun, wonderful thing to do, but you want to get up really early to go shoot, and you want to stay up really late. For the most part, that's when other people are not out there. But the light's the best in general, and that's when you usually get the best shots. Okay, see you in the next lecture.